Hey, it's Kelly. Yeah, so, about, no, as I had mentioned before, about 2.5 years ago, I had a pretty serious breakdown. At the time, I had made a decision to transition. I had filed for a name change, and at the same time, I decided I was going to write a book that I had thought about for years about writing, and it was kind of an autobiography and inspirational book. And I mentioned that I started writing that, and it quickly became very, very emotional, and it brought back a whole lot. Um, at the time, well, actually, for most of my life, I think, I kind of hid everything else behind the fact that I was transgender and kind of put that as the wall, and kind of hid all of the other emotions and all the other traumas and everything behind that, so I didn't have to face them. And as soon as that, I came to terms with being transgender and made the decision to transition, all of that other stuff now suddenly came forward. And when I started writing about it, it all came back at once. So I don't know that I can ever finish writing that book. I've sat down and looked at it, and pretty quickly there's some emotions, and I have a fear that if I actually just start writing, that it's just going to be, it might go back to the same because it's all within me. So I'm going to try something. I'm going to try talking about it. Um, because, if I release to others, it seems to help. If even writing, it seems I'm just keeping it into myself, and I don't think that works. So I'm going to try talking about it. So I'm going to kind of go through what I had written, kind of give you a synopsis of it. And kind of give a little bit of my life story and see if maybe it touches bases with somebody else, and somebody else will say, damn, that's me, and man, if Kelly can do it, then I can do it, and I can get through this. All right. So through it, I wrote some quotes and some other stuff. I mean, they may strike a chord with you, they may not, but for what it's worth, I'll go through them. Um, so I started out, um, and I wrote this book. I started writing this book as the title was going to be Life Without Parole. Um, the self imposed sentence of a transgendered woman. Um, yeah, I have a law degree and practiced a little bit, certified law student and all that stuff, and practiced a little bit defense work. But I thought it kind of fit, because I really kind of looked at it as that, that I've kind of sentenced myself to this life sentence. Or at least that's the way I used to look at it. It was this life sentence where I could kind of sort of be in general population. I'd be, isolated at times. But, it was, it really was a sentence that was self imposed. One I didn't understand, but came to understand over time. So, kind of went through, the whole process of a trial. Yeah, I just kind of, because it was something I had an interest in and knew about, I decided to go that route. So, yeah, let's go through it. So, one of my first quotes that I wrote. So, life can seem so cruel, and you may see no reason to live it. Know that your mind is a master thief. It has stolen your self worth and replaced it with a forgery. One which is so masterfully created that you will not see the difference until it is made clear to you by another. That forgery has no value and will eventually cause you to lose yours as well. Right? And these are all things that I've kind of, things that have kind of struck me over the years in dealing with depression and the other issues that I've dealt with. And it's kind of, some of them are kind of, things that have struck me. Like, wow, and this was one of those that, man, it's that our own minds can do that to us. They steal who we really are and replace it with something else, and it's so masterfully created. And it's depression that does that, and it's just wild. And it takes, we can't see it within ourselves right away. It takes somebody else to be able to point it out to us, and that's why it's so important to, seek help. Yeah, so being transgender, again, I felt like I sentenced myself. Um, Felt like I'd be condemned to a life without parole, confined to the prison that was in my mind. In I started writing this, and I go through it, and a lot of this is a little rough. There's a lot of stuff in here that I talk about that's pretty raw, and as I wrote in here, I didn't write this looking for any type of sympathy. That's not what I was looking for in this. I'm hoping that somebody else can take this information and prevent themselves from having to live this sentence. They can change their lives and be happy and not have to go through everything that I went through. This is definitely not, me seeking any type of, fame or fortune or anything. I don't want anybody else to ever have to suffer through this. Another quote, what happens to you in life does not define you, and it doesn't. What you're told about yourself does not either. You define yourself. You are composed of your values, your beliefs, your thoughts, and a compilation of your responses to what has happened and what has been said. You are the author of your story. Go tell it in your own words. And it's... I remember I had a friend who was having a birthday party. And I think the coolest gift... No, I'm sorry, it was a friend's son was having a birthday party. And another friend of ours gave him a gift of a book that had nothing written in it. But the front cover said the greatest story ever told. And when he gave it to him, this young man it was his 18th birthday. He was kind of confused, and this other friend said to him, the greatest story ever told is your story. You write it. And I thought that was kind of the coolest gift ever given. And that's kind of where I got this from, because it's like, that is true. You get to write your own story. We all get to write our own story. And, who cares what other people think of us? As long as we're on the right path and we're doing the right thing, who cares? Because at the end of the day, they don't pay our bills, right? So kind of where I was going with that. All right. So I was born on Wednesday, August 4th, 1965, to a single mother. She already had another child, 5 years older than me. My dad had left prior to my birth. I really don't know much of what really happened there. My mom really hasn't said. I have only talked to my real father twice in my life. He never made any attempt to reach out to me. I made attempts to reach out to him. My early childhood, up until like the age of 4, I have one memory, and that's it. And that was me sticking a bobby pin into a light socket and being thrown across the room. Which, it's probably pretty good that I do remember that. So at least, I have a little bit of normalcy upstairs, because I'm able to remember something like that as being pretty traumatic. But yeah, up until the age of 4, I really have, no memory other than that. The only thing I remember from like 4 and 5 is being picked on a lot by my family, and wanting to sneak into my mom's room and put on her clothes and her shoes. I got picked on by my older brother, my only uncle, and my grandfather, who we lived with quite a bit of the time because I was very effeminate. Um, very awkward as a kid, and yeah, they picked on me relentlessly, and it just I just remember at 4 years old. In fact, I remember at oh gosh, it must have been right before I turned 5. I remember it was the summer, so it must have been right before I turned 5. Um, there was a can of root beer, and it was on the table in the basement. We were living in my grandparents' house, and I picked it up, and it slipped out of my hand and spilled. And I was just shocked. I didn't. I was 4 years old, and I just remember my uncle swinging around, and the look in his eyes and the tone of his voice, and him just saying, "What are you effing stupid?" And the look in his eyes was just pure hate, and the tone of his voice. And I was so petrified. And then my grandfather, he just lets out with, "You are so useless." And again, the tone in his voice, it was just like, "Man, you mean this." And then my brother made some comment, and I don't remember what it was, but it was like, wow, as a 4-year-old. And I remember just going upstairs into the bedroom where I was at and just being in a ball crying and thinking, wow, this sucks, And it just, that was the first time, remember, and it just got worse from there. Every little thing I did, it was, "You're stupid, you're useless, you're never going to amount to anything, just go away, get out of my sight." And then the physical abuse started. First it was just being pushed out of the way, then it was being hit, and it was very traumatic as a kid because it's like, they were the only male figures in my life at the time, and here I was being shunned by them, I was being abused by them, and it was like, I didn't know what was going on. Here I'm wanting to wear women's clothes. I'm getting, it's the only time I felt comfortable. And the only male figures in my life are abusing me. And I never told my mom because it happened so much that I was so afraid. And she was the only one who never, at the time that I thought never abused me. I was so afraid to say something to her because I was always afraid that she would say, "Well, you are." And that would have just crushed me. So I never said anything to her. And it just continued on, as I turned to 5. And I remember I just, I never wanted to play any of the boy games. I wanted to pretend that I was, a waitress. We're talking back in, late 60s, early 70s, where guys just weren't waiters, unless they were top end restaurants. But the family in that, it's like, we had this, above ground pool, and it's like, "Oh, well, let me be the waitress and go get drinks," and I got ridiculed for it. And I just wanted to do girl things, and I didn't understand it. Most of the time I was shunned. I had no, when I started school, I had no friends in school. I was the weird kid. Yeah, I started, at a pretty young age, making up stories, wild stories to get people to like me. And when it didn't work, it just totally backfired. Yeah, so, it was tough growing up. And, here the whole time, I'm just thinking, what is wrong with me? I'm a boy, but I don't want to be. I like wearing girls' clothes. And it was just this constant struggle. And by the time I was 7, I was just so distraught. And I really don't, for the life of me, I cannot figure out where I got the idea from, but I took a whole bunch of pills, and I think it was aspirins, but I took a whole bunch of pills because I didn't want to live anymore at 7 years old. And yeah, I wound up in the hospital. They had to pump my stomach, and it was just lovely. I finally come to, and I'm in there, and there's my mom and my grandmother. They're still in the room, and everybody else is out in the hallway, and then my brother comes in, and he's got some smart ass comment to make. He's 12 years old now. Then my grandfather comes in, and he, won't even look at me. Then my uncle comes in there, and everybody leaves except for my uncle. And he looks over at me, and he just says, hey, next time, why don't you do the job right so you don't waste everybody's time, making us come here and stay at the hospital. And I'm like, I was 7 years old. And it was like, wow. It just like, damn. To say that to anybody, first of all, to say it to your nephew who's 7 years old, it's just like, how cruel can you be? It's just like, wow, really? Yeah, so that was my first attempt at suicide. And of course, I failed. So it was like, well, they're right. I am a failure, After that, suicide was constantly on my mind. When I was 8 years old, my mom married a guy, and he had two daughters. One was like a month younger than me, and the other one was a year younger. It was pretty cool. The one who was younger than me, we actually got along really well. And it was really cool because she loved Barbies, and I had, at the time, I can't think of the name of it, Big Jam. Instead, because G.I. Joes were kind of like, but there was another one, and so, it was like cool. I could play Barbies with her. And so we were living in Chicago at the time, and then he worked for Union Carbide Corporation. He got transferred to Ohio. Yeah, we got transferred to this little town in Ohio, and that was not good. Coming from Chicago, to a town of 13,000 people in Ohio was culture shock big time. This was the 70s, and the town was just an economic nightmare, loaded with drug addicts and alcoholics. They were extremely cliquish. Us coming from Chicago, we were like, so outcast and greeted with suspicion. And, it was just a disaster waiting to happen, because here I was already a weird kid. Later on I found out why, but I was the weird kid. Now I was the weird kid from Chicago, so there was, he's probably a gangster's kid. It's just the weird stuff that kids come up with. And I dressed funny, so it was hard, and we came in the middle of a school year. And it was just a nightmare. So, we move in, and I have no friends. I'm picked on. Even the teacher was ruthless. She had no compassion whatsoever, and she encouraged the other students to pick on me. And so, it was loads of fun. We moved in just outside of town, a little subdivision out there, and there was a boy next door who was 1 year younger than me, and then another one right behind our house who was a year younger than me. And then across the street was a young girl who was a year younger than me. First day we were there full time, I met the boy next door. And we kind of hung out that first day, and, I thought, okay, cool, maybe I will have a friend here. But by the second day, he was, I'd come outside, he'd take off running and go to the other boy's house who was behind, and they would take off running and laughing at me. And, it was like, okay, I see where this is going. So, I just kind of hung out by myself and, started school and just kind of hung out by myself, even at school. And, I just figured, this is kind of the way it was in Chicago. I guess it's the way it's going to be here. But, it was tough in school because, like I said, it was just, I got picked on. And again, I started again with the wild storytelling, trying to get people to like me. And because I just wanted a friend. And it was stupid, because it was, immediately I got called out on it. And so now I was the weird kid, I was the liar, and, I dressed funny. So, and then the teacher, because I had lied once, I was always a liar. And she was just brutal. I struggled with math. So every time we did math in a class, she made sure she called on me to give answers. And, she'd constantly pressure me. And it sucked because she knew I couldn't get the answer, but she purposely did it. As the year went on, she got bolder and bolder. She'd call me up to the board and make fun of me in front of the entire class. One time towards the end of the year, she called me up there, and then, she actually pushed me out of the way. I almost fell on the ground. And then she just turns around the entire class and she goes, "This is the easiest math problem you could ever do." And then she points at me and says, obviously, my name was Carl. Carl needs to go back to second grade. And then she starts laughing and she's encouraging the other kids. And I'm like, I was so embarrassed. So about a week after this, I raised my hand. We got about an hour left of school, and I raised my hand and I asked her if I can go to the restroom because I really have to go. And she says, "No, school's almost over." And I said, "But we still have an hour left." And she said, "No," very sternly. And I said, "I really need to use the restroom." And again, she said no. And about 5 minutes later, I couldn't hold it any longer. And, I ended up having an accident. And one of the other kids saw it and started laughing and making a big scene about it. And she, she immediately, "Oh, you're nasty." And she's making this huge scene out of it in front of everybody. And it was just, she just did everything she could to humiliate me in front of that class. And it just, it sealed my fate for the rest of the time at that school, the rest of my, my elementary school years, because I was stuck being with around those kids for the rest of that time, and then even into middle school and high school, Yeah, so it was tough, and yeah, I remember, when I was 9 years old, and let me step back just a second though. There was also in the neighborhood where I lived, about a half a block away from me, was the neighborhood bully. And he loved picking on me. It got to the point where I was a little over a mile from school, and I didn't care what time of year it was. I was not going to ride the bus. I walked to and from school, and it worked out perfectly because, we were out in the country a little bit. So by the time I walked, I would kind of get home at the same time as the bus, so my mom never knew. But if I rode the bus, I knew I was going to get beat up and picked on and that. So one day, it had just been really tough because, just between the teachers, the students, I just had enough. And I was walking home, and I had to cross a state highway that is actually pretty busy. And I had been crying the whole time I'd been walking, and I came up to the highway, and I had just had enough. And there was a pickup truck coming, and I just thought, I'm done. And I stepped out in front of it, and the driver had enough time to swerve and get around me. And I just collapsed on the road and was in tears. And he stopped, and another driver saw what happened, and they stopped. And, so they came running over to me, and they were both consoling me, thinking, that I was freaking out because I almost got hit. And what they didn't understand is that I was freaking out because I failed again. And here my family was right. I was a failure. And all I kept thinking is, I can't even kill myself. Man, this is going to suck. Life is going to suck if I can't even kill myself. That's all I kept thinking about. And it was, man, it hurt. It hurt so deeply to think, because at the time I was a believer too, and I'm thinking, there's this God who supposedly loves me that made me this way. I'm trans. I've got these mental issues. I'm the weirdest kid around. I have no friends. I'm stupid. And I can't even kill myself. I can't even end it all. What now? And it was just, I felt so defeated at 9 years old. Yeah, and it just, it took everything out of me. And, it just, but what was I to do? It's just like, well, crap, I guess, just go on with this miserable life. And I did. And it was just trudging on day by day, hating everything about me, everything about my life, and trying to figure a way out of it all. And I tried numerous times. But all through elementary school was just brutal. By the time I was 10, I was breaking into neighbors' homes and garages and stealing alcohol and getting drunk. Actually, by the time I was 9, I was doing that. By the time I was 10, I was a full-blown alcoholic. By the time I was 11, I started smoking marijuana. By the time I was 12, I was using harder drugs. Junior high, I was out of control. Drinking, high all the time, getting in trouble with the police. Everything from forging checks, spray painting buildings and vehicles, just did all kinds of stuff. Tons of drugs, tons of alcohol. Just totally out of control. And it's because I didn't know what I was doing. I was out of it. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what was happening to me. I was afraid. I was scared. And I didn't know who to go to for help. Again, we're talking the 70s. It's not like I could go just talk to anybody about and say, hey, I like wearing women's clothes. It was, so taboo then. So, it was hard. Middle school was God, a blur, such a blur. And then high school. It's funny because middle school I actually started getting friends, and it's only because I actually had money, so I had drugs all the time, and people wanted to be around me because I had drugs. They were using me. It's not like I really had friends, they were just using me. And then in high school that even continued more, and then I started dealing drugs, and so I had friends. I had people wanting to hang around me. I was being used. I was still getting in trouble all the time. Everybody in school knew I was a druggie. All the teachers knew. My poor mom probably got phone calls left and right. None of the parents wanted me around their kids. I was bad news, and I was. I was high all the time. I was drunk all the time. I was going into grocery stores and stealing liquor in the morning and taking it into school and drinking nonstop throughout the day. Getting out of school and going to the drive-through liquor stores around town because all my brother's friends worked there and they knew me, so they'd sell to me. I was just on the run all the time. I had no control from home. They pretty much, I think they didn't know what to do with me because I was so out of control and they were afraid of me, so they just let me kind of go. And I was, out of control. I should have been controlled. I mean, I got in so much trouble with the police. I probably should have been in juvenile hall. And it really all boils down to the fact that I was transgendered, and I didn't know how to deal with it, and I was scared. So I tried to drink it away and drug it away. I didn't know how to deal with my emotions. I didn't know how to deal with people. I was so immature. I was so repressed emotionally. I mean, my emotional intelligence was probably 2 years old. And, all of that combined, I was just a basket case, and I was a train wreck. And I didn't know what to do with myself. I mean, I had no guidance, no one there to guide me. And again, I didn't talk, so nobody knew what to do. And, it was ugly. Thank God for a deputy sheriff who saw something in me. And even though I was in a really bad, time of my life with drugs and alcohol and not really wanting to listen to anybody, he had said something that kind of stuck with me. And, he had just said, there's something in you that's good. I can see it. And I know it's there. And just the way he presented it to me really kind of made me stop and think. And, because of that, he gave me an opportunity, and I took it, and I joined the military. And it did change my life. I do owe that to him. Not all cops are bad. He saw something in me, and I was headed down a really bad path. And, I took it to heart. And it did make a difference, and I did change my life. I mean, I went through some rough stuff after, but I did change my life. And it's been good. But here's the thing. I don't know if I would go back and change anything in my past. Maybe some of the ways I've reacted to things. But I wouldn't change anything that happened to me, because it's made me who I am. And it's given me the insights and the wisdom that I have. Not that I'm that smart, but I did gain wisdom from experience. And it's made me who I am today. And I'm hoping that those lessons and those experiences allow me to prevent somebody else from going through the same. Yeah, it's, it wasn't an easy road, but then again, a lot of it was self-imposed. And, I've learned so much from it, and I am grateful for a lot of it. I'm so very grateful where I am now. And again, I don't think I'd be where I am now if I hadn't gone through what I have. So, there's a lot to it. But yeah, I don't think I would change anything. It's kind of funny. When I look back, especially at my really early childhood, I remember when I was like 5 years old. You know how, like, when you're a little kid, you think about, especially like little boys, it's like, ooh, driving a dump truck or something like that. Or, you're driving a motorcycle, or you're a cop, or you're a fireman. You know what my fantasies were when I was 5 years old? Was being able to go out in my yard and digging a tunnel, and then having this underground cavern where I had all these beautiful ball gowns and dresses and these different wedding gowns, and I could go down there and wear these beautiful gowns whenever I wanted. That was my fantasies. And here I was a 5-year-old boy. Well, no, I was a 5-year-old girl stuck in a boy's body. And it's, I think back at that, and it's funny because those are the only memories I have as a kid. Is, those dreams of, look at me in my beautiful ball gown, look at me in my beautiful dress. And it's, it's so funny when I hear people talking about, well, it's a decision. Really? So at 5 years old, I made that decision. Okay. Yeah. Um, yeah, it's just funny because I really have very few memories as a child. I mean, I remember little bits of like a fishing trip up to Minnesota, little bits here and there, but it's funny that the vast majority of my memories are had to do with just thoughts about being a woman or times that I dressed, um, or playing with girls. Yeah, I mean it's funny because like I look back at high school, and one of my most vivid memories is the day for one of our spirit weeks. One of the days they had was Switcheroo Day, and how I was so mad at myself for not having the courage to dress as a girl that day. When all these guys did, all these jocks did, and I didn't have the courage to do it, and I so wanted to. And that's one of the memories I have of high school. I mean, I can't remember hardly anything about high school, but that is one that I vividly remember seeing all those guys, and I still remember what they looked like, and just being so disappointed in myself for not having the courage to do it. It's weird. Um, but yeah, so my early childhood and up through high school was brutal. Um, High school, there were so many times that I was out at night with friends, so for call friends, getting high, getting drunk, cruising around, doing whatever. That I times I thought about saying something, and there was one person who he actually kind of took advantage of me sexually. Um, yeah, it was kind of weird. We were out drinking and getting high, and he started talking to me about how one of our friends liked him to touch him. And, I was pretty messed up at the time. And, already I was so confused about what the hell's going on with me. And, I was so confused. And I ended up letting him. I didn't really want to. And then he started performing um, oral sex. And I was so uncomfortable and I didn't want him doing it. And man, it really kind of freaked me out. And it made me really uncomfortable. And that really kind of messed with me because I was thinking, well, God, if I want to be a woman, why does this? What are what's going on here? It just kind of really messed with me. And I mean, at the time I was a freshman, and I like it was kind of like, what am I? Who am I? And for a long time after that, I couldn't figure out. I mean, I didn't know what I was. I didn't know who I was, and it really did mess with me. Yeah, I mean that just really kind of threw me off. Um, yeah, and still the whole time, my brother was constantly picking on me. His friends, he let them talk to me any way they wanted. And, fortunately, the one thing, and I think it's because my mom would have killed him, he never let them beat on me. He beat on me, but he never let them. Um, but yeah, the neighborhood bully still through high school, he continued that until there was, one incident where yeah, he would just wail on me, and I finally got away from him one day, and I ran from him, and we ended up in kind of a yard, kind of halfway between our houses, and he tackled me, and we ended up by a tree, and there was a metal tree stake, that had been pulled up out of the ground next to a kind of a sapling. And not really thinking, I grabbed that and swung as I spun around, and I hit him in the side of the head with it. And I was just, because I was just scared. And I hit him pretty hard, and it kind of cut a gash in the side of his head, and it was bleeding pretty bad. I was shocked. I mean, I was just totally horrified at what just happened. I dropped the steak, and I was just standing there, mouth agape. He grabs his head, and there's blood everywhere, so he took off, and, my first thought was, oh shit, I'm going to pay for this later. But, fortunately, that stopped the physical attacks from him. It didn't stop the verbal abuse, but it did stop the physical, at least. But, there was plenty of other people who had their way. In high school, I was a whopping 130 pounds, 5'8". I was pretty scrawny, so it was pretty easy to pick on me. And again, I was pretty effeminate, so... Yeah. So I finished high school, barely. It was a struggle. By my junior year, I was such a mess. I had been using and drinking so heavily. I mean, between LSD, cocaine, popping pills left and right. I was popping speed in the morning and popping downers at night, and coke in between, and LSD and everything else. I was just such a mess. I really don't remember most of my junior year. But I was in junior achievement, and every year they had a trade fair. And in my junior achievement group, there was a girl who I was so smitten by her. And I remember trade fair, just before trade fair, we'd gotten to be good friends. And while we were at trade fair, I kind of sensed a connection between us. And I really wanted to pursue it because I really started liking her. But I knew that, with the way I was going to have to change in order to have any shot at being with her. So, that summer, because it was towards the end of the year, I decided I was going to kind of get my life together, clean up, and, just see what happens. So, up until that point, I had long hair, I wore concert t-shirts, and I was your typical druggie. So I decided I'd cut my hair, I'd start dressing more respectably, acting more respectably. Unfortunately, I didn't quit the drugs or alcohol. But I looked a lot better. I started wearing button-down shirts, dress slacks, and I looked, very respectable. Teachers took note of it right away. But unfortunately, over the summer, she ended up started dating somebody else. So that was, kind of a real bummer to me. But I decided, you know what, I'm getting some positive results out of this change, why not stick with it? So I did. About halfway through the year, I ended up dating another girl who was a year younger. Well, she wasn't a year younger than me, she was a grade younger than me. And, it wasn't, I feel bad because it wasn't so much that I really loved her. It was more that it was kind of a recovery thing. And I was lonely. Unfortunately, I got her pregnant. And I did the only thing I knew how to do, and that was run. So I denied it was mine. And I bolted. Which is probably, to be honest with you, probably the better thing that I did, because I was so fucked up that it's probably best that I didn't have that child around in my life, because I was such a mess. Again, the drugs and alcohol and everything else, I was not a good person. But in the meantime, I started dating another girl that I'd known in high school, and we ended up getting married. Again, drugs, alcohol, being young, being stupid, and that didn't last very long. And again, part of it was the whole time I was cross dressing, and I didn't know what it was. I thought I loved her. I thought that marrying her would take away that desire to cross dress, but it didn't. Um, I didn't tell her about it because I thought that it would go away, but it didn't. And yeah, I mean, it was wrong. So, we were married for less than a year. We divorced. Um, I was a mess. Yeah, I ended up with a DUI. 20 years old. Just my life going nowhere. And so that's when I just started, or, shortly after that, I decided to join the military. Um, yeah, I got in. Um, Kind of funny. One of the reasons I joined too was because I thought, okay, well that way, I'll prove to myself that I'm a man. And I did well in basic training. I actually kind of got into it. Um, I thought, cool, this was the answer. I went in the artillery. I could have had any job I wanted in the military, but I decided to do something that was manly. So I went in the artillery and got to my first duty assignment. I got selected as the battalion executive officer's driver. So I went and worked in the motor pool, ordering repair parts for vehicles and that, and drove the major around. Um, and I drank very heavily. Got myself in quite a bit of trouble my first and second year there. I was stationed in Hawaii. Oh, rough place. What kind of was, actually. We spent a lot of time in the field, but yeah, I did a lot of drinking, got myself in a lot of trouble. Didn't take it very seriously. But finally got my act together and started to do very well. Took my career very seriously, started getting a lot of awards and citations. After 3 years, I re-enlisted and became an x-ray tech. And left there, and before I had left there, I had met another woman. She had 2 children. She was she was 11 years older than me. Thought I was in love, and asked her to marry me and move with me to Texas while I was going to X-ray school, and she did. And yeah, that was a huge mistake. Well, sort of. So we left Hawaii, went to Texas, drinking heavily. After we got there, found out she was pregnant. But I also found out, well, before we had left, and she had told me that she was a recovering addict. But when we got to Texas, found out she was using again, and it was heroin. And she was pregnant. So that didn't go very well. Finally got her to get into a program, but the problem was I was still drinking heavily, and that didn't work very well for her. So she stayed clean while she was pregnant, but after she had the baby, it didn't take long for her to go back because I was drinking. Yeah, so we were in Texas for 6 months, and then we went to Fort Lewis, Washington, up in Tacoma, Washington, where I had to do my on-the-job training. And we went up there, and after a few months up there, we both decided we needed to get our lives in order because we had this baby. And so we both decided to go into treatment and get ourselves straight, and we did, and it made a big difference. We started to get our lives together. Our marriage actually improved quite a bit, and we were doing very well. So I finished up my training up there. We tried to stay there. It didn't work out, and then I got reassigned to Fort Irwin, California, in the Mojave Desert. Which was actually a pretty good thing because I got down there, and within 6 months of arriving there, the person who was the non-commissioned officer in charge was retiring, and I was the senior ranking, so I was becoming the non-commissioned officer in charge. And because there wasn't a military radiologist, I was kind of becoming the director of radiology services. So it was a lot of responsibility, but it was a good opportunity for me. And my wife at the time actually got hired on as a civilian with Hughes Aircraft or Hughes Enterprises down there, which she was doing the targeting systems, making really good money. So we were living on base, making very good money. She actually worked right next door to the hospital I was at, so we had lunch together all the time. So it was actually a really good opportunity. We were there for 3.5 years, and we were able to travel and do a lot of things, go see a lot of stuff. So it was very good for us. We were both clean and sober, and we now had a second daughter. Her son was still with us, so the 3 kids and ourselves, and we did very well, and it was a really good environment. Except my little problem was still there. So like if I had a day off and she worked, I was cross-dressing and she didn't know it. One day I decided that I was gonna include her into it. So I dressed. None of the kids were going to be home. So I dressed in her clothes. And I told her that somebody else had told me about an article they read that talked about doing this and how it, livened up the marriage. So she bought it. And we did, and we had fun. But then I wanted to do it again, and then again, and then again. And then it was every week. And then it was twice a week. And then she figured it out. Well, by then, I decided I was going to get out of the military. We moved to Oregon, the state of Oregon. And I got out, but I joined the National Guard. And shortly after, I went full-time with the National Guard. I was in what's called an AGR, Active Guard and Reserve. So I was full-time military again. And occasionally I would dress en femme, with her. But I wanted to do it more. And finally I said to her one day, I said, I have to do it more. And I'm going to, whether you're with me or not. And that ended the marriage. Again, I should have been upfront with her in the beginning, but I wasn't. And, I feel bad for it. After the divorce, things got really ugly. She went back to using drugs, and it was a nightmare. A lot of legal battles over the kids, and ultimately ended up in her losing her life because of that addiction. She did get clean, but in the long run, it ended up costing her life. Which is sad. For my kids, it's really sad, and for her. But yeah. And it's sad because during this whole time, when we were married, I just kept asking for God to intervene and to take this away from me, and that was the whole thing over my entire life, because I'd always been a believer as a kid and growing up, and even though a lot of times I walked away out of frustration, it was always in the back of my mind that God can change this, and I'd beg and I'd plead, and sometimes I'd scream and yell. And I just couldn't understand why. What had I done that was so bad that he couldn't take this from me? And I just couldn't understand it. It just kept coming back to how could such a loving God be so cruel as to let me suffer like this? And it just, it perplexed me, and I dug deeper and deeper into the Word, and I just, I struggled with it. And I think of that, not getting any answers and not being able to talk about it really is what drove me away. And then when I finally did open up about it, the response was the final nail in the coffin. So, that's kind of where that was. But yeah, that was my, that was my childhood. Again, I really don't remember anything up until I was 4, and the stuff after that was not good. Um, I know we did a lot of traveling. Again, my grandparents had a lot of money. My dad made good money. My stepdad made good money, but we did a lot of traveling, but I really don't remember much of it. All I remember is just wanting to dress in my mom's clothes, wanting to be a girl, just being treated like crap most of the time, having no friends, being lonely all the time, and yeah, it's how it was, and can't go back and change it, but I can learn from it. All right, so next time I will talk more about my time in the military, because that was kind of interesting, being in the military from the late 80s up until 2009. I went through the Reagan era when you could not, prior to Don't Ask, Don't Tell, through Don't Ask, Don't Tell, which was a joke, all the way up to right when Obama took over. So yeah, I'll go through that and some of the other things that happened in my life during that time. Yeah, some of the other issues with depression that I've dealt with and all that. So I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your day. Take care of yourselves. Reach out if you need any help. 988. Don't hesitate to use that. Be good to yourselves. Positive affirmations, please. Any suggestions, comments, questions, concerns, please let me know. All right, take care.